You're sitting with a group of people. Someone pulls out their phone and plays a video. And then you hear it. Your own voice. And something inside you immediately reacts. Not with recognition. With discomfort. Almost like hearing a stranger. A stranger you don't particularly like. You say the words everyone says in that moment. Is that really what I sound like? I hate my voice. And everyone laughs a little, nods, moves on. But for some people, it doesn't move on. The feeling stays. They avoid voice messages. They dread speaking in meetings. They re-record the same 10-second clip 17 times and still don't send it. They watch their own videos on mute. So here's the question worth actually sitting with. Why does your own voice sound so wrong to you? And why does it bother some people so deeply that it quietly shapes how they show up in the world? The answer involves your brain, your ears, your psychology, and something that almost nobody ever explains properly. Let's start with the most important piece of this puzzle. The voice you hear when you speak, and the voice everyone else hears, are not the same voice. Not even close. When you speak, sound travels two ways to your own ears. The first way is through the air, the same path everyone else receives it. But the second way is through the bones and tissues inside your own skull. That internal vibration travels directly to your inner ear and arrives mixed in with the external sound. Bone-conducted sound is richer, deeper, and fuller than sound traveling through air alone. It adds low frequencies that simply don't survive the journey through open air to another person's ears. So the voice you have heard your entire life, the one that feels natural.
You have been hearing this internal, enhanced version of your voice for your entire life, thousands of hours of it. It is one of the most deeply familiar sounds your brain knows. And then a recording presents something that contradicts that familiarity completely. Your brain flags it as wrong, not because it is wrong, but because it doesn't match. That mismatch is the starting point of the discomfort. But it's not the whole story, because some people hear a recording of their voice, feel mildly surprised, and move on. Others feel something much closer to genuine distress. And the difference between those two reactions has very little to do with the voice itself. Here's where it gets deeper. The discomfort of hearing your own recording.
They think they just have an objectively bad voice. But the distress isn't really about the voice. It's about the fear that others see them differently than they see themselves. Let's make this concrete for a moment. You re-record a voice note 4 times. Each version sounds wrong in a slightly different way. Too high, too flat, too fast. You send the third one because it feels like the least bad option. And then you spend the next hour mildly hoping the other person isn't paying close attention. Or you watch back a video of yourself speaking, and the entire time you're not really hearing the content. You're just listening to the voice and silently criticizing it, comparing it to something warmer, smoother, more confident that exists only in your head. Or someone compliments your voice, and your first instinct is that they must not be paying attention, or they're being polite, because the version you hear in recordings doesn't match anything you describe as worth complimenting. This is the part that matters. The problem isn't that the voice is bad. The problem is that the standard it's being compared against doesn't exist in reality. It exists only in the internal, bone-enhanced, psychologically filtered experience you've had with your own voice your entire life. Nobody else has ever heard that version. It is only yours. Everyone else has only ever heard the recording version, and they formed their impression of you from exactly that. Meaning the voice other people associate with you, the one you find unbearable, is the only version of your voice they have ever known. It is your voice to them. It already is how you sound.
and they are not reacting to it the way you are. That's worth sitting with for a moment. For some people, this discomfort stays small, a minor cringe and nothing more. But for others, it quietly restructures how they move through the world. They avoid sending voice messages, even when it would be faster and more personal. They stay silent in meetings, not because they have nothing to say, but because they don't want their voice amplified in a way.
Every time a person avoids something because of their voice, they don't get the experience that would prove the fear wrong. They don't hear the feedback that the voice they hate lands fine on everyone else. The avoidance protects the belief, and the belief keeps producing avoidance. It becomes self-sustaining, and the voice never gets a fair chance. This is not a small quality of life issue for people who experience it strongly. It affects relationships, careers, confidence, and the simple daily willingness to take up space in a room. All of it traced back to a sound that is different from an expectation that was never realistic to begin with. So what actually changes this? The first thing, and possibly the most useful, is understanding what you just learned in this video. The voice you grew up hearing was never the real external version. It was a richer, bone-amplified internal experience. The recording is not a worse version of your voice. It is simply the accurate external. Every time a person avoids something because of their voice, they don't get the experience that would prove the fear wrong. They don't hear the feedback that the voice they hate lands fine on everyone else. The avoidance protects the belief, and the belief keeps producing avoidance. It becomes self-sustaining, and the voice never gets a fair chance. This is not a small quality of life issue for people who experience it strongly. It affects relationships, careers, confidence, and the simple daily willingness to take up space in a room. All of it traced back to a sound that is different from an expectation that was never realistic to begin with. So what actually changes this? The first thing, and possibly the most useful, is understanding what you just learned in this video. The voice you grew up hearing was never the real external version. It was a richer, bone-amplified internal experience. The recording is not a worse version of your voice. It is simply the accurate external version, the one that exists in the actual world, the one other people have always heard. Knowing that doesn't make the discomfort vanish immediately, but it removes the false premise underneath it. You are not discovering that your voice is worse than you thought. You are simply hearing it the way it has always existed outside of your own head.
The second thing that helps is exposure without judgment. Most people who hate hearing their own voice listen to a recording, cringe, and stop. The cringe feels like information, but it isn't. It's just a reflex built on unfamiliarity. The more you listen without immediately pulling away, the more the brain recalibrates. The strangeness decreases. What was jarring becomes familiar. What was unfamiliar becomes, gradually, recognizable as yours. This is not about forcing yourself to love your voice. It's about giving your brain enough exposure to stop treating it as a threat. The third thing is separating the voice from the self-worth attached to it. If the deeper issue is fear of how others perceive you, the voice is just a surface expression of that. And that fear, the gap between who you feel you are and who you worry comes across to others, is worth looking at directly, not through the voice, through the actual belief underneath it. Because the voice didn't create that fear. It just became the place where the fear chose to live. Here's the simplest version of everything this video has been about. You hate your voice because it doesn't sound like the version you've spent your whole life hearing from the inside. But that inside version was never real. It was a product of physics and biology, a private experience that only ever existed for you. The voice other people hear has been there all along, familiar to them, recognizable as you, carrying your words, your humor, your kindness, your thoughts, all of it landing the way it was meant to land. The harshest critic of your voice is the one person who has never actually heard it the way the rest of the world does. And that person is you. Your voice is not the problem. The comparison is. And now that you understand where the comparison comes from, you don't have to keep losing to it.